The Galactic Council chamber was never quiet. It was a place of constant debate, of shouting diplomats, of flashing lights and tense translators trying to keep up with hundreds of species speaking at once. It was where wars had been prevented, started, or ended in the span of a single day. But on this day, the noise died in an instant. The moment the message came through the central relay, the entire room froze as if the air itself had turned to stone. Thousands of delegates from every corner of the galaxy stared at the holographic projection hanging in the air. A declaration of war. Not just any war. A war aimed at Earth. For a few seconds, no one moved. Some counselors blinked slowly, as if trying to process words that couldn't be real. Others leaned forward in disbelief, their scaled, furred, or armored faces reflecting the blue light of the projection. The message itself was blunt, without hesitation, without diplomacy. We, the Fokker Dominion, declare war on the human world known as Earth. We will invade and conquer. There was no demand, no conditions, no warning, just arrogance, just madness. A low murmur spread through the chamber like wind brushing through dry grass. They didn't, someone whispered. This must be a joke. Another voice, high and shaky, said, no one declares war on Earth. And yet, the seal on the message was real, official, verified. One of the council's monitors repeated the authentication 3 times, and each time the result came back the same. This was not a hoax. The Fokker Dominion had just announced their own death. A tall reptilian counselor leaned back in his chair, letting out a low growl. They're insane, he muttered. Completely insane. A feathered delegate on the opposite side of the chamber fluffed her wings nervously. They're not insane, she whispered. They're ignorant. A wave of tension rolled across the chamber. Everyone here remembered the last time someone had tried something like this. Decades ago, an empire twice as large as the Fokker had threatened Earth, believing the humans were just another upstart species with loud mouths and fast ships. They were gone now, not conquered, not negotiated with, gone. Erased from the stars like dust blown into darkness. That was why no one had dared provoke Earth again. Not until now. Fokker forces are mobilizing, the chamber AI announced in its neutral, emotionless tone. Initial fleet signatures confirm 22 capital vessels, 87 cruisers, and several hundred assault craft. They are advancing toward the Terran sector. The words struck the chamber like a hammer. A tentacled envoy slammed the table. Do they not understand what they're doing? A representative from a distant star cluster hissed. Apparently not. They think Earth will negotiate. That's what fools think before they burn. In one corner of the chamber, an old counselor with cybernetic implants sat silently, his single good eye fixed on the glowing map of the galaxy. He had been there 50 years ago when the last war against humanity had been fought. He had watched entire fleets vanish from his tactical screens. He had heard the silence after the humans stopped speaking. It was the kind of silence that only predators make before they strike. This will not end well, he whispered to no one in particular. They've just woken something they can't control. A young Fokker representative, arrogant, dressed in sharp red and gold, stood up, his voice rising above the murmurs. We are not afraid of your precious humans. They are loud, disorganized, and primitive. Their strength is exaggerated. This galaxy bends too easily to their shadow. His tone dripped with confidence. He bared his teeth in a grin, expecting fear. He found none. Instead, he found cold, quiet stares. The room wasn't afraid of Earth. It was afraid for him. An insectoid delegate clicked his mandibles slowly. Do you even know what you've done? He asked. Do you know what happens to people who invade Earth? The young Fokker puffed his chest. We will win. We have fleets. We have armies. We have allies. No. A deep voice rumbled from the far end of the chamber. It belonged to a massive reptilian counselor, old and battle-scarred. You have a death wish. A ripple of quiet agreement passed through the chamber. For the first time in hours, no one argued, no one made speeches, no one tried to offer peace. They all knew what was about to happen. This wasn't going to be a war. It was going to be a slaughter, and not for Earth. The council's speaker, an ancient being with silver tendrils flowing like smoke, rose slowly from the central platform. The chamber lights dimmed, and all attention focused on the figure. The Fokker Dominion has declared war on Earth, the speaker said, their voice amplified through every translator in the room. This council acknowledges the message, but let history record this moment clearly. The speaker leaned forward, their voice growing quieter, colder. This is not bravery. This is not strategy. This is suicide. A heavy silence followed. No one disagreed. One delegate, shaking slightly, whispered what many were thinking. Why would they do this? Why invade them? Another answered without looking up. Because they've never seen Earth fight. They don't understand what they've done. A hologram of the Fokker fleet appeared over the center of the chamber. Bright red symbols marked their positions, already moving toward Sol. Around it, blue sigils began to pulse. Earth's outer patrol lines, quiet and still. The council watched, some with pity, some with grim fascination, as the young empire marched toward something they couldn't possibly comprehend. We should warn them, a feathered delegate said. We should stop them. They won't listen, another replied. No one ever does. The cybernetic counselor clenched his mechanical fist slowly. He remembered the First Terran War, the speed, the silence, the way entire fleets simply disappeared without fanfare. Humanity didn't broadcast threats. Humanity didn't posture. Humanity acted. And when it acted, it didn't stop halfway. They'll learn, he said finally, his voice like iron scraping on stone. The galaxy always learns. One way or another. The Fokker representative slammed his hands on the table, shouting over the room. You think Earth is invincible? That's a myth. We'll show you all that they can bleed. A quiet voice answered from the shadows. A counselor from a species that had once fought humanity long ago. No, the voice said softly. You'll show us how fast you'll burn. A hush fell again. Even the Fokker representative felt it now. The weight of every eye in the room, the way no one supported him. No applause, no nods, just silence. Cold, heavy silence. Somewhere deep inside him, a seed of fear planted itself, though his mouth still wore a defiant sneer. The speaker ended the session with a single line, their voice echoing across the galaxy as the chamber lights faded. Let the stars bear witness. The Fokker Dominion has chosen its grave. As the delegates left, whispers filled the hall. Some whispered that Earth would strike like it always did, without warning, without hesitation. Others wondered if the Fokker would even make it to the Sol system before their fleet vanished into debris. But no one, not a single soul, believed they would survive. For centuries, Earth had remained quiet. Not weak, not harmless, just quiet. And now that quiet would end. In the darkness above Sol, humanity would be waiting. And this time, the stars themselves would tremble. Far from the polished halls of the Galactic Council, deep inside the heart of the Fokker Dominion, the atmosphere was the complete opposite. Their war council chamber was filled with laughter, arrogance, and the kind of confidence that only comes from not knowing fear. Generals sat around a circular black stone table, their red and gold uniforms shining under the ceiling lights, their faces smug as they examined the glowing projection of the Terran system. They pointed at Earth like it was a soft piece of fruit waiting to be crushed. The Fokker leader, draped in a long ceremonial cape that dragged behind him like a shadow, leaned forward with a grin spreading across his scaled face. He slammed his clawed hand against the table and declared to his officers that within a single cycle Earth would kneel. He called humans overconfident, chaotic, weak. He told his generals that their fleets had grown too powerful to be challenged. The room echoed with laughter and cheers as if they were discussing a parade, not an invasion. Outside the command tower, the sky above their capital world burned with the exhaust of warships lifting off in perfect formation. Massive troop transports, capital destroyers, and siege cruisers rose into orbit like a swarm of iron locusts. Reporters and citizens filled the streets, waving banners, chanting the Empire's anthem. In their minds, victory was already written. No one in their empire dared to question the plan, because they had convinced themselves that Earth was nothing more than a myth wrapped in reputation. They believed no one could stand against their numbers. One of the younger admirals, still too green to understand the weight of war, turned to his superior and asked why the council seemed so uneasy about this conflict. The older man snorted and brushed the question aside, saying the council was filled with cowards who feared human stories. He called it propaganda, just old ghost tales to keep smaller empires in line. His voice dripped with contempt. He told the young admiral that humans had won in the past only because no one had truly challenged them. He believed this time would be different. This time, the Fokker Dominion would make the galaxy bow. The fleet assembly yards stretched for miles, and every drydock roared with activity. War banners flapped in the artificial winds as the Empire poured everything it had into the invasion. Commanders strutted through the ranks, shouting speeches about destiny, strength, and how history would remember their names. Every soldier believed they were about to become a hero. Not a single one of them understood they were marching toward their own funeral. Inside the war room, the supreme strategist activated the holomap and traced the invasion route with his claw. They would strike fast, bypass the outlying colonies, and go straight for Earth. They believed this would break the human spirit in one blow. No prolonged war, no chance for defense, just shock and submission. They didn't understand that Earth had been built on surviving the impossible. They didn't know humanity didn't break. It burned. One lone intelligence officer hesitated at the corner of the room, his hands gripping a small datapad. He had spent years collecting classified reports, whispers, and old records about humanity's last war. He had seen the numbers, the vanished fleets, the erased empires. His throat was dry as sand, and a quiet chill settled over him as the generals cheered. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could finish his first sentence, the supreme strategist cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Old stories," the strategist said sharply, "are for children. We are not children." The room erupted into more laughter, and the officer lowered his head, silent. The fleet continued to grow, thousands of ships aligned like blades in the void. Messages were broadcast across the empire, boasting of the coming victory, calling the invasion the great cleansing of the Terran world. They believed Earth would fall within days. They had already begun planning the parades, the monuments, the songs. But even as they celebrated, a subtle unease crept through a few officers. Whispers traveled in dark corners, old veterans remembering the Terran wars of the past. They remembered how fleets far larger than this had disappeared into nothing. But the Empire silenced them with threats and mockery. Pride had replaced reason. Arrogance had replaced caution. In the main control room, the Fokker leader raised a ceremonial blade into the air as the fleet prepared to depart. "We are the future," he shouted to millions watching. "We will tear down the walls of Earth and plant our banners where they have stood too long. They will kneel or they will burn." His speech shook the airwaves, filled their people with wild pride. They thought it was the start of a glorious war. But across the galaxy, far from their blind cheering, there were those who had seen what came when humans were provoked. Old soldiers, ancient allies, broken enemies. They heard this speech and went quiet, because they knew what the Fokker leader didn't. They knew Earth's silence was never weakness. It was warning. The fleet engines lit the night sky like suns being born. Hundreds of thousands cheered as the ships rose into the dark void, carrying their pride, their arrogance, and their unshakable belief that they were untouchable. They didn't realize they had already crossed a line from which there was no return. The stars above didn't look like victory anymore. They looked like a graveyard waiting to open its arms. Back in the Grand Galactic Council chamber, the mood had shifted from shock to something colder. No one was laughing anymore. Delegates who once whispered nervously were now leaning over their terminals, speaking in sharp, controlled tones. The Fokker Dominion's declaration of war was not just a reckless move. It was a ticking bomb that every intelligent species in the galaxy could already hear. The Council's highest security branch had begun pulling old war records, dusty archives no one had dared to look at for decades. Every incident involving humanity was being replayed on hidden screens, Grainy footage of star systems that no longer existed, fleets turned to drifting wrecks, empires that had once been powerful and now were nothing but a cautionary line in history. A heavy tension filled the air. No one needed to explain why everyone was nervous. They all knew what would happen next. When Earth was attacked, it never responded with hesitation. It responded like a storm that didn't stop until the enemy was erased. A tall, winged ambassador slammed his clawed hand on the table. They've lost their minds. The Fokker have signed their own death sentence. He hissed, feathers flaring in agitation. Across the room, an elder reptilian diplomat leaned forward, his deep voice vibrating through the chamber. "It's worse than that," he said slowly. "When Earth goes to war, the entire map changes." Several delegates shifted in their seats at those words. They all remembered. They had seen it before. The last time someone tried to strike at humanity, trade routes collapsed, planets fell into panic, and the Council nearly fractured from the shockwaves of one war. Humanity didn't just fight wars, they reshaped the galaxy when they fought. In a far corner of the chamber, a small group of intelligence officers from multiple species gathered in a tight circle. Their hushed voices carried weight. "We should intervene," one said. "Warn the Fokker. Force a ceasefire before it's too late." Another officer shook their head grimly. "They won't listen. They think Earth is weak because Earth has been quiet. They don't understand what quiet means when it comes to humans." The room grew darker as a massive galactic map flickered to life above the central floor. Red dots indicated Fokker fleet movements. They were already mobilizing in full strength. Blue markers, Earth's defense perimeter, remained still and cold, as if sleeping. But everyone knew the truth. Earth never showed its cards until it was too late. A young counselor from a neutral world raised a trembling voice. "What if Earth? What if they do what they did last time?" Her words hung in the air like smoke. She didn't have to finish. Everyone knew what she meant. The last time Earth had been provoked, the war hadn't lasted months or even weeks. It had ended in hours. The enemy's fleet had disappeared into silence, their homeworld burned, and their names struck from every star map in existence. It was one of the few events that united the galaxy in quiet fear. "They'll respond," the elder reptilian said. "They always do. They wait, they calculate, and then they strike like nothing else in the galaxy." A deep silence spread across the chamber. Even the Fokker representative, who had been smug and loud before, was now sweating beneath his ceremonial armor. He had never seen humanity fight. He had only heard stories he had mocked. But now, looking at the faces of the counselors, at the fear that filled the air, he felt a weight he couldn't explain. It wasn't Earth's fleet that frightened them. It was their certainty. The council speaker rose slowly, their silver tendrils glowing faintly under the light. Their voice carried across the chamber like a quiet storm. "We will attempt diplomatic outreach," they said. "But make no mistake, this war cannot be stopped by words alone. It never has been. Earth does not negotiate when its people are threatened. It answers." A surge of whispers filled the chamber. Some agreed to prepare neutral zones, evacuation plans, and hidden safe worlds. Others argued that they should distance themselves entirely and let the Fokker pay for their arrogance. It wasn't because they supported the Fokker. It was because they feared what humanity would unleash when it finally moved. In the shadows, a veteran counselor sat alone, his cybernetic eye reflecting the map. He had once been a captain during the Terran War, a war most tried to forget. He remembered their silence before the attack, the way human fleets moved like ghosts through the dark, precise and merciless. He had survived, but his fleet had not. He whispered to himself, "They don't even know what's coming." Outside the council chamber, the galactic news networks had already picked up the declaration. Every planet, every station, every major power in the galaxy was talking about it. Merchants whispered in fear about trade routes. Soldiers checked their border defenses. Whole colonies went quiet at the mention of Earth. And far away in the Sol system, beneath miles of reinforced stone and steel, deep within the Terran Defense Command, red lights were beginning to flash. Humanity hadn't made a sound yet. No broadcasts, no speeches, Just quiet movements, quiet signals, quiet activation codes that hadn't been used in decades. The galaxy could sense it like a storm forming on the horizon, a storm that could not be stopped. And inside the council chamber, as the delegates looked at the glowing map, one unspoken truth settled in every heart. The Fokker Dominion hadn't just declared war on Earth. They had declared war on something far older, far colder, and far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. And soon, they would learn what it meant to make that mistake, deep beneath the surface of Earth, far away from the noise of the council chamber and the arrogance of the Fokker Dominion. A cold and silent place had awakened. Terran Defense Command was not like other military installations in the galaxy. It didn't shine with banners or play anthems. It sat buried under layers of reinforced rock and black steel, older than most alien nations, built during a time when humanity had prepared for every possible threat. Inside, rows of ancient lights flickered to life one by one, turning the dark halls into veins of glowing red. Alarms didn't scream. They pulsed in steady, calm rhythms, like a heartbeat that had been sleeping for too long. High command officers stepped out of hidden corridors, their faces unreadable, their movements precise. There were no loud speeches, no celebration, no chaos. Humanity never panicked. Humanity remembered. A massive screen at the center of the war room projected the message from the Fokker Dominion. The officers watched in silence. No one laughed. No one cursed. The room was filled with the kind of stillness that made the air itself feel heavy. A single admiral walked forward, his boots echoing on the steel floor. His hair was gray, his face lined with age, but his eyes were sharp as blades. He didn't need a briefing. He had seen this before. One look at the fleet movement on the projection told him everything he needed to know. The Fokker thought they were hunting. They didn't realize they were walking straight into the lion's den. He gave a short nod to the communications officer. Initiate Soul Defense Protocol Prime. The words were quiet, but the effect was instant. Deep beneath the oceans, bunkers opened like mechanical beasts rising from hibernation. Satellite networks realigned, revealing black arrays of classified weapons that had not been active in 50 years. Shipyards hidden inside hollowed-out moons began to hum as engineers rushed into position. Orbital docks lit up with rows of Terran warships, silent, waiting. They had always been there, hidden in plain sight, as if humanity knew this day would come again. Across Earth, people received the news differently than the rest of the galaxy. There was no panic, no mass fear, no running. Ordinary citizens watched the reports from their homes, factories, farms, and stations. Some clenched their fists. Some smiled without humor. A single sentence began circulating through every network, from military channels to private conversations. They made a mistake. Every soldier in the Terran Defense Forces knew what those words meant. It wasn't just about pride. It was about survival. Humanity didn't start wars, but it always finished them. In orbit, fleets began to move without a sound. Stealth formations glided into strategic positions, surrounding Sol like invisible blades in the dark. These were not ceremonial ships. These were war machines built in the shadows, carrying technology the galaxy thought was just rumor. Terran admirals exchanged no grand speeches, just crisp, calculated commands. This wasn't the first time Earth had been challenged. It would not be the last. Phase 1, Observation. A calm voice announced over the encrypted network. Phase 2, Elimination. Pending. At the edge of the solar system, early warning sentinels detected the Fokker fleet's first long-range jumps. Blinding energy signatures lit up the outer grid. AI systems tracked their movements with perfect precision. Every ship, every formation, every pattern noted and analyzed. Humanity didn't react in panic. It reacted like a hunter stalking prey. Inside the war room, the admiral stood with his hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the screen. Around him, generals and intelligence officers worked in perfect silence, each of them aware that this moment was the calm before the storm. No one dared to underestimate their enemy, but none of them feared either. They understood the nature of their power, and they knew exactly how this would end. Do they even know what they're walking into? one junior officer whispered. The admiral didn't look away from the screen. No, he said quietly. They don't. But they'll learn. From the depths of the asteroid belts came the soft hum of Terran strike fleets aligning with gravitational slingshot points. In distant orbits, war satellites unfolded their hidden panels, revealing massive kinetic weapon arrays. On Mars, hidden bunkers opened like the jaws of silent predators, revealing rows of black missile silos stretching to the horizon. It wasn't chaos. It was precision. It was a system built over centuries for this exact moment. Terran intelligence networks, known for being invisible and terrifyingly efficient, began dissecting the Fokker fleet before it even entered the system. Commanders received reports down to the fuel capacity of enemy cruisers, their formation weaknesses, their standard engagement tactics. They knew everything. The Fokker thought this war would begin when their fleet arrived. They didn't understand that, in reality, it had already begun the moment they sent the message. In cities across Earth, massive screens displayed a single banner, Sol Protocol active. The last time those words appeared, entire empires disappeared. In the dark orbit of Neptune, a stealth carrier the size of a mountain slowly came online, its engines lighting up the void like blue fire. Around it, destroyers and strike craft moved like shadows, silent and deadly. The fleet wasn't just defending, it was positioning to strike. The galaxy always whispered about the Terran fleet but had never truly seen it. The Fokker would be the first in decades to learn the truth. Humanity's response wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It was cold, clinical, absolute. The kind of response that didn't leave survivors. In the war room, the admiral finally turned to his officers, his voice calm, clear, and final. They wanted a war, he said. They're about to learn what that means. And with a single gesture, the storm that had slept beneath Earth for half a century opened its eyes to the edge of Terran space, beyond the quiet gravity wells and the hidden defenses that had been sleeping for decades. The first contact signatures flashed across the blackness. The Fokker fleet arrived in a wave of brilliant light, their jump drives screaming against the void as hundreds of ships tore their way into real space. Their formation spread out like a glittering wall of arrogance, banners glowing, comms blasting proud declarations to the galaxy. They wanted everyone to see their power. Their commander stood at the bridge window of the lead dreadnought, his hands folded behind his back, his smile sharp and full of victory that hadn't even happened yet. To him, Earth was just a name, a world made dangerous by legends and old stories. He believed the human fleet would panic and scatter, that they would beg to negotiate. But the space ahead of them was unervingly still. No warships rushed out to meet them. No defensive fleets formed desperate lines. The darkness itself seemed to be holding its breath. Several of his bridge officers exchanged uneasy glances. The commander barked at them not to be weak, but even he could feel it, the kind of silence that didn't come from weakness but from something far older and colder. They pushed forward, broadcasting threats on every channel. Not a single reply came back. The stars themselves felt distant. In the Terran command network, every move of the Fokker fleet was already being tracked. Terran ships didn't reveal their presence. They didn't light up their engines or boast on open channels. They observed. The alien fleet didn't realize that as they advanced, they had already crossed dozens of invisible sensor nets, activated layers of silent traps, and entered a perimeter that had no exits. High above Neptune's orbit, a massive Terran carrier floated in the shadows, completely invisible to conventional scanners. Thousands of Black Strike ships waited in absolute silence, their engines cold, their weapons armed. To an outsider, it was empty space. To Terran command, it was a loaded battlefield. The Fokker fleet formed their line, scanning for enemy ships. Their tactical AI reported nothing but empty stars and planetary bodies. Confusion began to crawl into their communications. Why wasn't the human fleet reacting? Why weren't their defenses lighting up? Their commander gave the order to move closer, believing Earth was bluffing. Inside the Terran war room, the admiral watched the glowing red fleet markers moving slowly into the kill zone. He stood with his hands behind his back, his face like carved stone, eyes locked on the display. All around him, officers moved like a single machine. No panic, No raised voices, only calm precision. A low, steady tone filled the room as the enemy fleet crossed the final perimeter. The admiral spoke softly. "They're in the cage." At that exact moment, far out in the darkness, the first layer of Terran stealth ships powered up their drives. No warning, no broadcast. 1 second there was nothing. The next, hundreds of Terran warships unfolded from the black like shadows, pulling blades from their sheaths. Massive destroyers slid silently out from asteroid fields. Carriers emerged from behind the rings of distant worlds. Frigates uncloaked from hidden vectors that no scanner could have detected. To the Fokker fleet, it was as if the darkness itself had grown teeth. For the first time, their command bridge went quiet. The confident grins disappeared from their faces. "Multiple contacts," one officer screamed. "They're everywhere." The commander stared at the screens as thousands of new signatures surrounded them, forming a massive net. Every angle they could possibly retreat to was already blocked. "How did they—" he began, but his voice faltered. The humans hadn't just prepared for their arrival. They had been waiting. A soft ping echoed through the Fokker fleet. Then another, and another. It wasn't weapons fire. It was target locks. Every single Fokker ship was being painted by multiple Terran targeting systems. The humans were letting them know, silently, that they were already dead. Panic rippled through the alien formation. Captains began yelling across comms, trying to reposition, trying to figure out how they had walked into an invisible wall. It didn't matter. The trap had been set long before their first jump. "They're surrounding us," someone shouted. "How many ships? How many ships do they have?" The answer was simple. Enough. On the Terran side, not a single word was wasted. Not a single ship broke formation. The admiral gave a nod. Across the void, hundreds of stealth missiles silently detached from their launchers, gliding through space with no heat, no light, and no mercy. By the time the Fokker sensors detected them, it was already too late. The first volley hit like a hammer. Entire cruiser wings vanished in silent flashes. Dreadnoughts shook under precision strikes that cracked their shields like glass. Their proud flagship staggered as half its systems went dark. The Fokker commander screamed orders, but the battlefield was no longer his. It belonged to Earth. What terrified them most was not the strength of the attack, but the way the humans did it. No speeches, no threats, no warning. It was quiet, cold, perfect. Their communications turned into chaos. "We need reinforcements. Shields failing. Where are they hitting us from?" They weren't ready for this kind of war. They expected noise, confusion, a show of force. They got nothing but precision death from the dark. Terran fighters swarmed like knives, striking fast and vanishing before the enemy could even target them. Massive artillery platforms, hidden near the Kuiper Belt, unleashed wave after wave of kinetic fire that shattered ship after ship. In less than 15 minutes, the mighty invasion fleet that had arrived with such arrogance was broken into fragments. The Fokker commander stood frozen on his bridge, the smile long gone, replaced with something far heavier: realization. The galaxy had warned them. The Council had warned them. They hadn't listened. He turned toward the massive, distant blue, on the main screen, Earth. The storm they had mocked had finally opened its eyes, and now they were drowning in it. The Fokker commander gripped the edge of his command platform, claws digging into the polished metal as alarms howled around him. The bridge that once buzzed with confidence now throbbed with panic and red light. The main screen was a graveyard. Icons representing proud Fokker ships blinked out one by one, as if an invisible hand was erasing them from existence. His comm channels were full of screaming officers, broken signals, and desperate calls for help. Entire wings of cruisers were gone. Their forward line had collapsed in less than 15 minutes. The great fleet that had been built up with years of arrogance now looked like scattered debris in Terran space. The commander barked orders, but his voice sounded thin even to his own ears. "Reform the second line. Lock shields and return fire," he roared. But it didn't matter. The Terran fleet didn't give them time to reform. Every move they made was predicted, every angle covered, every attempt to fight back smothered before it even began. Terran destroyers glided like silent blades through the wreckage, their guns lighting up the dark with surgical precision. Each shot wasn't random, it targeted weak points, control nodes, engines, and power cores. The Fokker ships didn't explode in glorious bursts. They died quietly, collapsing into cold silence as systems failed and lights faded out. A junior officer shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "They're inside the formation." The commander turned just in time to see a Terran strike group tear through the flank like a ghost fleet, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Fokker targeting systems couldn't lock onto them. They weren't just losing, they couldn't even see what was killing them. Their tactical map had turned into a sea of red and gray, a storm of motion they couldn't control. The commander slammed his fist on the console. "Deploy the reserve fleet. All heavy guns to forward fire." But the moment they began to move, they were already under another wave of precision strikes. Mines that hadn't been detected on any scan suddenly ignited, ripping holes through their rear line. Stealth drones they never knew existed swarmed their sensor arrays, blinding entire sectors of the battlefield. It wasn't a war. It was a dissection. On the human side, the admiral stood in the war room, hands clasped behind his back, expression carved from stone. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Sector 3, clean sweep," he said calmly. A squadron of Terran cruisers turned their guns, firing in perfect unison. 7 Fokker warships simply disappeared. "Sector 5, engage and clear." Another swarm of strike craft moved like a tide, silent and deadly, cutting through their midline before the aliens even realized they were there. The Fokker commander stumbled as his ship shook violently. Panels burst around him, sparks raining down like burning snow. "Status," he barked. "Shields at 32%. Someone screamed. "We're taking heavy fire from multiple vectors. We can't track them." "Then track the origin." "There is no single origin." That was the moment he understood. The humans weren't fighting like any empire he'd ever seen. They weren't lining up for a glorious battle, weren't trying to prove power. They were hunting. The entire Terran fleet moved like a single machine, striking, vanishing, striking again. There were no wasted shots, no desperate charges. Just quiet, systematic destruction. He spun toward the communications officer. "Send a message to the fleet. Full retreat." But the officer looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Retreat where, sir?" "We're surrounded." The commander froze. He looked at the tactical display. Blue Terran signatures had completely encircled them. Every path out was blocked. The moment they entered the system, they'd been inside a trap, and they hadn't even realized it. The enemy hadn't reacted to their invasion. They had planned for it. Behind the lines, massive Terran dreadnoughts came out of the shadows, their hulls black as night, their engines humming like distant thunder. They hadn't even fired yet. The smaller strike forces were just the opening move. These monsters were the endgame. "Target locks confirmed," a Terran weapons officer said quietly. The admiral nodded once. "Finish it." The black dreadnoughts opened fire. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't wild. It was clean, controlled annihilation. Beams of concentrated energy sliced through capital ships like paper. Armor melted. Hulls crumpled. Hundreds of Fokker soldiers never even saw their enemy. In seconds, their center collapsed completely. Debris drifted in silence. The glow of burning engines the only light in the dark. The Fokker commander fell to his knees as his bridge shook violently. A massive impact tore through the spine of his flagship, splitting half the ship's internal structure. Crew screamed as systems failed and consoles exploded. The enemy wasn't just overpowering them, they were erasing them. One officer whispered through tears. How are they doing this? How did they know everything?" No one answered. The commander looked up at the dark, distant blue orb on the screen. Earth hadn't spoken once. No threats, no speeches, no ultimatums. It had just acted. Cold, precise, final. And he finally understood why the galaxy feared humanity. It wasn't their size or their numbers. It was their silence. The kind of silence that followed predators who didn't need to roar. In orbit around Neptune, the admiral stood unmoving as reports came in. Enemy losses exceeded 80%. Their formations were shattered. Terran losses were minimal. The operation had gone exactly as planned. No one celebrated. This wasn't something humanity cheered for. It was simply what they did. When someone came for Earth, they never walked away again. In the final moments of the battle, the Fokker commander's screen flickered. For the first time since the war began, he saw the Terran fleet uncloaked in full formation. Thousands of black warships surrounding his broken remnants like an iron storm. And then the transmission cut to black as his flagship split apart and burned silently into the void. The storm was not coming anymore. It had already passed. And it had left nothing behind. The battlefield was silent now. The screams, the static, the panicked orders from Fokker officers. All of it had faded into the deep, endless void. What remained of their once proud invasion fleet drifted aimlessly through Terran space like a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered pride. Hulls floated half-burned. Lights flickered weakly before dying out completely. And escape pods that had been launched in desperation were already being pulled in by Terran interceptors. No one escaped. No one ever did. The Terran fleet, now fully uncloaked, surrounded the ruins like black wolves standing over the carcass of their prey. Their ships didn't gloat, didn't flash bright banners, didn't broadcast a single victory message. They simply hung there in perfect formation. Thousands of warships, silent, cold, waiting. It wasn't the kind of victory the Fokker had ever imagined. There was no room for drama here. Only inevitability. Deep inside the Terran war room, the admiral stood still, his hands clasped behind his back as the glowing tactical map displayed the aftermath. Red icons representing the Fokker fleet had almost completely vanished. The few that remained were disabled, dead in the water. Around him, his officers reported cleanly, methodically. All enemy propulsion signatures neutralized. No active fire. No remaining offensive capability. Containment grid stable. No external communications escaped the perimeter. The admiral nodded once, his face unreadable. Proceed with collection and containment. All across the field, Terran salvage teams and military boarding units moved with machine-like precision. They didn't waste time on speeches or announcements. Disabled ships were captured. Enemy officers were extracted. Command cores were seized. This wasn't just about destroying the enemy. It was about making sure no one could ever forget what had happened here. Inside one of the captured cruisers, Fokker soldiers sat slumped on the floor, their weapons discarded, their faces pale. Their once proud uniforms were stained with soot and sweat. Many of them still didn't understand how the humans had done it, how the war was already over before they fired their second volley. But the truth was simple. The moment they declared war on Earth, their fate had been sealed. The admiral turned to the intelligence officers gathered behind him. "Signal secure line to Council," he ordered quietly. A young comms officer nodded and patched the encrypted channel. Moments later, the great chamber of the Galactic Council flickered to life as a holographic projection in front of him. Dozens of alien faces stared back, some grim, some pale, some too afraid to speak. The speaker's silver tendrils floated around their head like drifting smoke. Their voice was calm but tight. "Is it over?" The admiral didn't use grand words. "Yes," he replied. "Their fleet has been neutralized. Total loss on their side. Terran losses minimal." A wave of whispers spread through the council chamber. The delegates had known this was coming, but hearing it still shook them. The Fokker Dominion had sent one of the largest invasion fleets in recent memory, and Earth had crushed it in less than a single day. One elder counselor leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "How many ships?" The admiral didn't hesitate. "All of them." The speaker closed their eyes slowly. Around them, other delegates stared at the holomap showing the wreckage around the Sol system. Entire empires had fallen with fewer losses than this. One of the younger delegates, a new voice, still naive enough to believe in heroics, spoke with a trembling tone. "And what will you do with the survivors?" The admiral's eyes were cold and steady. "They will answer for what they did." But the message isn't for them. It's for everyone else. The council chamber went silent. They all understood. This wasn't about revenge. It was about setting a reminder to every empire, every fleet, every ambitious ruler who thought Earth was just a quiet blue world waiting to be conquered. It was a reminder of what lay beneath that quiet. Out on the battlefield, the last of the Fokker dreadnoughts cracked apart, its massive hull folding in on itself as Terran strike teams planted demolition charges in its reactor. A bright flash cut through the blackness as the ship vanished, leaving nothing but drifting fragments. To the Terran fleet, this was just cleanup. To the galaxy, it was a message carved into the stars. One of the Admiral's officers turned to him, his voice steady but respectful. "Orders, sir." The Admiral glanced at the silent wreckage outside, his eyes narrowing slightly. No grand broadcast, no anthem, just send the standard line. The officer nodded. Moments later, across countless encrypted networks, intelligence channels, and political comms, a short message was transmitted out from Earth. No images, no recordings, just 12 simple words that the galaxy had learned to fear. Do not mistake our silence for weakness. Earth remembers everything. In the far corners of space, those who read the message shivered. Some cursed the Fokker for their arrogance. Others quietly reinforced their borders. But no one dared speak against humanity. Not after this. Inside the council chamber, the speaker finally whispered, "May the stars have mercy on them." But everyone knew the stars had nothing to do with it. Earth had acted. And when Earth acted, mercy was not part of the equation. Back in the war room, the Admiral gave a single nod. Begin Phase 2. All around him, the Terran fleet shifted formation. While the galaxy whispered and trembled, humanity moved forward, quiet as the storm that had just erased an empire. The Fokker dominion was gone, and the silence that followed belonged to Earth. In the aftermath of the battle, the stars over the Sol system shone quietly, as if nothing had happened, as if hundreds of warships had not been turned into drifting metal coffins. The void was calm again, but beneath that silence, the galaxy trembled. What had begun as a bold, arrogant declaration of war had ended in one of the fastest and most decisive military defeats in modern history. The Fokker Dominion, a power that once boasted of its fleets, its conquests, its strength, no longer had a fleet to boast of. It no longer had power to throw around. Its arrogance had died somewhere out in the cold dark, torn apart by Terran guns that never missed. Back on Earth, the war room lights dimmed as operations shifted from battle to aftermath. The Admiral stood at the center of the command platform, surrounded by large tactical displays. Every red marker representing enemy forces had vanished. What remained were blue Terran formations, perfectly aligned, moving with quiet, surgical precision. No one cheered. No one celebrated. Humanity didn't glorify war. For them, this was never about pride. This was about memory, about survival. The Admiral looked up at the wall of reports scrolling across the screens. Enemy casualties, total. Prisoners secured, minimal. Civilian losses, none. Terran losses, negligible. Operation concluded, successful. He exhaled slowly, not from relief, but from the weight of inevitability. They had known this would happen the moment the Fokker had declared war. This was never a fight. It was an execution carried out with cold efficiency. In orbit around Mars, Terran recovery teams swept through the wreckage fields. Boarding crews moved like shadows, collecting what remained of Fokker command cores, fleet records, and communication drives. Every scrap of intelligence was valuable. Earth never left loose ends. Out past Jupiter, massive dreadnoughts began returning to their hidden stations, engines glowing faint blue against the void. The trap had been set, sprung, and completed with mechanical precision. The storm had come and gone, leaving only silence. On the Fokker homeworld, that silence felt like a blade at the throat. Their government, once loud and proud, now sat in shattered silence. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors, their leaders pale and shaking. Transmission after transmission came in from their last surviving scout drones, showing the wreckage, showing their burning fleet, showing the iron wall of humanity waiting in the dark. There was no counterattack. There would be no retaliation. The Fokker Dominion had been broken in a single night, and the galaxy had watched. On dozens of worlds, in trade hubs and war stations, whispers spread faster than any ship could travel. They woke Earth. They went too far. No one survives when the Terrans stop being quiet. Old stories resurfaced, the same stories the Fokker had laughed at. Empires that had once challenged Earth. Fleets that had disappeared without a trace. Star systems that had been wiped from maps and memory. The galaxy remembered why no one had dared to test humanity for decades. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, the speaker stood before thousands of representatives. The mood was different now. No one was debating. No one was arguing. Everyone was listening. A live feed of the ruined battlefield floated above the chamber. A field of burning wreckage surrounded by Terran warships. The speaker's voice was calm and cold. "This is what happens when you mistake silence for weakness," they said. "This is what happens when you provoke Earth." Even those who had once criticized humanity for its isolation, for its silence, now said nothing. They knew. Earth did not posture. It did not threaten. It simply erased what stood against it. In the shadow of this new reality, alliances began to shift quietly. Bordering powers reviewed their military plans, adjusted their diplomacy, and made new calculations. No one wanted to be the next Fokker. Meanwhile, in Terran command, the admiral stood before a massive viewport overlooking the stars. Around him, officers worked efficiently, finalizing reports and securing classified data. "Council has confirmed surrender," one officer reported. "The Fokker High Command is requesting terms." The admiral didn't smile. "They'll get whatever terms we decide," he said softly. He turned his gaze back toward the darkness outside, where the last pieces of the Fokker fleet drifted lifeless. "Send them the standard message." A moment later, across secure channels, one short transmission reached the Fokker High Command. 12 words. The same 12 words that had already burned themselves into galactic history. "Do not mistake our silence for weakness. Earth remembers everything." On the Fokker homeworld, their leaders listened to the message in silence. There was no anger now. No resistance. Only the heavy, crushing realization that they had made the greatest mistake in their history. They had declared war on something far more dangerous than they'd ever understood. And the price was everything they had. Across the galaxy, no one celebrated their fall. No one pitied them either. Empires simply looked toward Earth and remembered why they had stayed quiet all these years. Humanity didn't rule through threats. It didn't rule at all. It simply stood in the dark, waiting, watching, reminding everyone that it was still here. In the war room, the admiral turned off the last battle display, and the room fell into a heavy silence. The storm had ended, but its shadow would linger for generations. And somewhere, beneath the quiet stars, the galaxy whispered the lesson once more. Never wake the sleeping giant. Never provoke Earth. Never mistake silence for weakness.